Kellen approached the hill from the south side of the wood at a canter, slowing his horse as he approached the end of the road. The trail he followed led him almost due north, occasionally meandering to the east or west as it wound its way around natural obstacles strewn across the path. Much of the time the trail was wide enough for 3 or 4 horses to ride, but here at the end it narrowed to a thin line of dirt that stopped right at the edge of a thick stand of silver birches. Standing next to his mount, Kellen shaded his eyes and looked at the wood. It rose gently in front of him like a rolling cloud bank, gradually rising to just under 1,000 feet. This hill had long been known to the local inhabitants as Mineth Baden, which was in Kellen's mind a rather generous assessment, calling the hill that he now looked at a mountain. Kellen could see the crest of the hill, about 3/4 the way up, rising out of the tree line like a bald spot. Patches of brown dirt, sandy-colored scalp, poked through the trees, the domes of dirt pointing accusingly at the clear, unbroken blue of the early morning sky. Near to the top sat the hill fort that had originally been built to serve as the lookout point for Bad Ancestor, the small settlement scattered within the trees to the northeast of the gently sloping hill. Bad Ancestor and Mineth Baden were located just to the east of one of the hottest spots in the recent round of Briton-Saxon skirmishes, the River Baden. The river itself was a wholly unremarkable body of water, blithely unaware of the blood spilled on both sides of its steep, stony banks. The location of the river, however, was another matter altogether. It was feared by Arthur and his allies that should this particular piece of land fall into Saxon hands, Britain would be divided into 2, with the Saxons planted firmly in the middle. As far as battle strategies went, to have one's enemy surrounded was an advantage not normally seen as a shortcoming. In this case, however, it was not an advantage, as the settlers, located to the immediate northeast and southeast of the river, were simple farmers, none of whom had seen a day of battle in their lives. They would simply become fodder for the Saxon wolves to feed on. Kellen walked up to the nearest birch and placed his hand on the bole of the tree. He stood stock still, as if he were listening for a message not meant to be heard by the ears. Several minutes passed, and still Kellen stood with his hand pressed to the tree. Finally he shook his head. "Lid, there's been a lot of pain here recently." The silver-gray horse had come up to nuzzle his neck as he stood evaluating the forest in front of them. "I don't like the feel of things." Lid whinnied his approval. The horse had apparently not liked the feel of the place either. Kellen tugged the reins and tried to lead him under the trees, but Lid had other ideas and began to stubbornly tug back. "Easy, boy," he said softly. "We need to get to the top and have a look around." He patted the horse's withers gently. "It'll be okay." The horse allowed himself to be placated by Kellen's soothing voice, and the pair walked slowly up the hill. They weaved their way through the trees, footsteps crunching on the leaves and deadfall that carpeted the forest floor. Kellen looked cautiously back and forth, trying to spot the source of their ill feelings. As they approached the midway point, he noticed the ground appeared scarred. The leaves and sticks had been furrowed and tossed into piles, as if some struggle had occurred. He stooped to the ground, keeping hold of the reins, for fear Lid would bolt at the first opportunity. "This doesn't look good, boy," he said. Kellen examined the deadfall with his fingertips. An oily substance marked the dirt. He rubbed his fingers in it and brought it closer to his face. Lid whinnied loudly. His face paled as he stood. Blood. He looked around nervously, the feeling of being watched so strong it had caused the small hairs on the back of his neck to rise. "We need to be careful here, Lid." He led the horse further up the hill. As they progressed, the forest sounds that had been pleasantly playing in the air, the bird song, the chirping of crickets, the skittering noises of squirrels, stopped. A thick silence had descended on the upper portion of the hill. Kellen looked from side to side as they continued slowly forward. The ground became more torn up the further they progressed, showing definite signs of a struggle that looked like it had happened recently. They stepped into a small clearing, and Kellen froze. The horse skidded to a halt behind him. There on the hillside in front of them rose a sea of sticks that appeared to have been thrust into the ground. Atop the sticks were the gruesome remains of severed human heads, spiked upon the sticks in a cruel parody of live heads atop necks. Kellen's stomach tossed as he dropped to his knees, stunned at the grisly display. He let Lyd go, and the horse quickly made its way back down the hill, trailing his reins ignobly behind. Battle horses were courageous, but only to a point, particularly when taken by surprise. Kellen stood and approached the forest of stakes. He reached out and brushed the dirt and hair off of dead face. "Aye!" he screamed and stumbled backward as he recognized the face of Dermig, one of Arthur's younger knights. He looked more closely at the macabre crop that had been planted on the hillside. He recognized most of the faces, and recalled more than a few names. Some he had been close to, some he had helped to train. "This is what's become of them," Kellen said grimly into the silence. Arthur had sent a group of his younger warriors to Bad Ancestor, ostentiously to investigate rumors that had been floating into Caerleon of increased Saxon activity around the River Baden and on Mineth Baden itself. Specifically, they were to go to Bad Ancestor and look into the rumored Saxon activities. Arthur suspected that most of what had drifted to his court was just that, rumors on the wind. He still thought it prudent to investigate, and more, he thought it clever to send the smaller band of younger warriors, newly made knights, to investigate. Things had been quiet in and around Caerleon of late, and his newer knights, those who had yet to see their first battle, were getting restless as they hung around the placid city of the legions, waiting to take up arms for their king. This mission to Bad Ancestor would satisfy their desire for activity while placating the locals. The matter from Bad Ancestor was that Octa, the Jute, king of Kent, and Ailill, the Saxon king of Sussex, two warlords who had lately extended their territories in spite of repeated threats from Caerleon, had made a play for the area in proximity to the River Baden. Arthur knew he was going to have to do something about the incursion, and soon. He had sent a party of 25 young warriors to do some reconnaissance work before he developed specifics of a counter-sortie. They were under strict orders to ride lightly and not to engage any war party they might happen to see on their foray. Arthur didn't want a slaughter on his hands. He knew through experience what the younger knights did not. Where there were 2 Saxon warriors, there were likely to be 200. Kellen put his fingers to his lips and whistled loudly. While he waited for Lyd to return, he reverently moved among the stakes and removed his comrades' heads, setting each gently in a pile on the ground. The horse came reluctantly up the hill in deference to his master's call. Kellen removed his sword from the saddle. With the point of his blade, he traced out a square in the bruised soil. When he finished, he scraped the dirt out of the square, deepening the depression as he worked. He would bury the remains of the young warriors before he reported the grim news back to his king. It took the better part of 3 hours, but Kellen managed to inter the remains, respectfully placing the heads in the ground and covering them up with the loose soil. He sweated freely as he worked to pile stones, a makeshift cairn, atop the mass grave to keep any scavenging animals from desecrating the resting place of the young knights. He put the first head he found, the one belonging to the young knight Dermig, in a burlap sack and hung it from the saddle horn. He shivered as he thought of the last time a head had been brought to the Ardree in such a bag. It had been the head of Arthur's foster father Murig and his brother Paul and Freoch, ridden by his brother Kay into the very church that the High King was being married. It had been the spark that ignited the war with Lot of Orkney, a war that ended well for Arthur and his forces who, along with Lot's sons Agravain, Gawain, and Gareth, had beaten Lot and his mercenary barbarian horde at Edinburgh. "This will begin it," Kellen said to the horse as he slid up to the saddle.